Hey guys, welcome back to Home Built, and in this episode I'm going to do something about that old stereo in Archie. So those of you who didn't see my last engine build video will not be aware that I have finally actually named the cars. As I mentioned in the previous video, it's first world problems, but I kept talking about going out to the garage and doing some work on the 911, and it's like, what am I talking about? And I was looking for a name for the orange car for ages, and Mrs. Jeff came up with a brilliant suggestion, which is Harry, because it's orange and it's got some royal purple interior, so of course the younger version has got to be Archie. So we have Harry and Archie. So today I'm working on Archie, and that means doing something about that old stereo. So I'll just take you in now and show you what we're working with. So currently in here we have the factory Porsche stereo, which has actually been dropping out every now and then. Sometimes it sort of drops out. It doesn't keep the stations properly all the time, and I would like something a little bit more up to date and usable, with some Bluetooth and Apple CarPlay and some extra bits and pieces. So I went down to Super Cheap and got something to replace this whole unit. So what I went and got myself was, I went down to Super Cheap and got myself a Sony head unit. This is seems to be what a lot of the guys were recommending, and this has got Apple CarPlay and all the rest of it, so I think this is going to be a nice addition to the car. Can sync 2 phones at once, I believe, and yeah, it's going to be a nice upgrade from the old stereo that hasn't been working very well. And I got onto Amazon, and I'll put a link in the description, and I actually went and got the surrounds here, so that these are actually, I'm amazed at how cheap they were. I think they were about $40 delivered for the surrounds for this car, so that I can just swap it all over for the double din head unit and have it still all look nice and factory. So that is what we're doing. So let's start pulling everything apart. I have 2 of 4 plugs through. We have liftoff. Plugs are through. So that means that the climate control is back out there, which means I can start looking at the lower section and fitting that back up again. That's easy. So now I need to start looking at the stereo part and work out what I need to keep and what I need to get rid of, because I do actually have to trim out some of this stuff in here. So all that can go back away with the factory stereo. All right, so I've gone and done my research on what the original wires are. I managed to get on and find a link to what the wires do. It seems like there are a bunch of different options in the 996s. So the 996s and the 986 boxes all have similar combinations, but there's some that have direct wiring to the speakers. In this case, this little yellow plug here is just directly to an amplifier. So I need to wire up some RCAs to this output here. But for these ones, this is the main power unit for the stereo. So that's what I'm going to try and do first. This is the loom for the Sony head unit that I have, and because I no longer need these speaker wires, I'm going to go through and de-pin this now, because I don't want extra wires in behind the dash that I don't need. So I'll pull all of the pins out of the ones that I don't want, and leave the ones that I do. So the way I'm going through and joining these is I'm not actually going to cut the factory plugs off. I want to retain that so that they can be plugged in again later. All I'm doing is I go through with my wire strippers and I actually just spread the sheathing off the wire, giving myself a bit of space, and then I'm going to solder on these connections onto these. I considered crimping them, but in this case, particularly, I can't use heat shrink in here because I don't want to take the the actual pins out of the connector. So I'm just going to wrap them up with electrical tape and then seal them all up later. So I'm going to go through right now one by one and splice this harness into the factory one, so I'll have 2 plugs in behind the dash. Alright, so my initial splicing of the factory loom is done for now. There's a couple of other wires here. I'm not sure whether I'm going to connect them up or what yet, so I can de-pin them or whatever later. But for now I should have enough to just turn the stereo on. There'll be no sound, the speakers are not connected, but at least I should be able to plug it in and see if I've wired it up correctly enough to at least get sound, or get power. Looks like we got power. There we go. So at least my initial power settings are working. Let's just make sure when I turn the ignition off, power goes off. So we're partway there. We're doing all right at the moment. All right, so we've got the stereo working, and I just went down and had a quick trip down to Super Cheap to go and get some other bits and pieces, because I've realized that on this stereo, there's a bunch of different types of stereos, and this one, I've got to actually wire this plug here up to some RCA outputs. So these RCA cables, I just went down to Super Cheap and got to like an RCA extension lead. I'm going to cut this up now and hopefully be able to wire it into this yellow plug so that I can actually convert straight wires to the RCAs and power the amp the way it's supposed to be. Okay, so I did a bit of exploratory surgery on the RCA cable and cut it open, and there's 4 wires, but obviously I don't know which wire goes to which part of these connectors. I know that the factory amplifier actually has one shared ground and just 4 different signals. So I need to go to find the positives of these, which is the pins of the positives and the outsides of the negatives of the RCA cables. So I'm going to get out my favorite tool, this this power scanner. I've mentioned it in quite a few of my videos. It's a fantastic piece of gear. I love it. I'm not sponsored by them. I'll put a link to it in the description, but it's just so good for doing anything car related, and this in particular is going to be handy for this because I can just continuity test this stuff. But as I mentioned this tool before, like I can send 12 volts to any circuit, or send a negative to any circuit if I just by pressing a button. Plus it does continuity testing and resistance and everything. It's just so much easier than a set of multimeters, because the multimeter I still struggle to get my head around. I have to look it up every time. This thing is just easy. So anyway, let's continuity test these things and work out which bit is which. Oh, that makes things so much easier. This is slightly transparent. Before I was trying to look through and see if I could see the colours through going to which lead, and didn't even think. Continuity testing is just so easy. So I've worked out which is which. So now I just need to go through and trim this a bit shorter and wire this up to the amplifier, and then hopefully it'll all work. Okay, so because these RCAs are using the opposite ends of the same thing, I'm going to slide on a bit of my clear heat shrink, and I've labelled one front and one rear. So the reds are obviously going to be the right hands, and the blues are the left hands, and I'll know front and rear, so I'll know which is which for future reference if you're going to plug things in again and don't get them mixed around. All right, I have my labelled front and rear RCAs, so now it's time to start wiring them in. And as I said, I managed to look up and find a wiring diagram, so I know what each of the wires are. One each for the positive inputs, and the grounds are all shared on in this particular system. So I'm going to join all the grounds together and then join them in one, and then the individual fronts and rears, and we should be cooking with gas. All right, time for the proper test. So now I've got the RCAs wired. I need to mount the RCAs up, and having my handy little label makes it much easier. While I was down at Supercheap, I also got myself a European antenna adapter so that I can actually plug it into the antennas. All right, we have a fully working stereo, which is fantastic. So the antenna works, all the speakers work. That is a great relief, because this is the first time I've ever had to wire up a factory amplifier, and to get it to actually work properly is great. So now I know that works. Now I have to finish actually installing it. One more thing that I'm going to actually install while I'm here, seeing as I have everything out, I'm going to fit up a reverse camera to this as well. And I just dropped into Supercheap, got a reverse camera, so now it's time to start trying to put this into the mix. Okay, so here's the camera, and I'm thinking I can probably just use one of the screws on the tail light illumination lights, and just use the double-sided tape on the back of it, and that should be a good way to mount it without actually having to drill a hole in the car. And to put the wire in, I'll probably, if I'm going to drill a hole, I'll do it behind the number plate itself. So I'm going to remove the number plate now and see if I can find a place to put this wiring. Okay, well that was pretty easy to mount. I managed to pull out this little number plate light, and I fed the wire up through there, and I've screwed it in with one screw on that side, and the adhesive tape on the other side of the lens. So that's mounted up nicely, and it's sort of hidden nicely in amongst the black of the number plate, so it doesn't sort of stand out too much. I think it's quite decent. So now it's time to go inside and see if I can run these wires somehow into the car and in and out and through. But before I do that, I do have to connect it up to the reverse light. So I need to pull off one of these taillight lenses and see if I can connect up this wire to the taillight lens. All right, so I removed the tail light. Really simple on this car. There's one 10mm bolt on this side here, and just undo that, and the whole tail light sort of peels out and open. And I get to the loom in here. I just had a look at the actual back of the tail light itself, and I can see here, this is the reverse light here, so that's the reverse globe. I can see that it's got a brown wire. Brown is ground, so it's brown and it's light blue going through here. Followed it through to the loom where it comes out on this side. It's actually a blue-black wire. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through, I'm going to peel this back and connect up the blue-black and the brown to my camera. And there's actually these little drainage holes here, and that's perfect. That goes straight through into the engine bay, so I'm going to run the wire through there. I've actually got my little set of universal grommets, so I'm going to go through, find a grommet that's the right size. So I've got a grommet in the hole, run the wires through there. Nice and easy. This is probably the simplest part of the whole job so far. So there we go, I've wired it into the factory loom. I've got a little grommet here, the wires go in here. This will all tuck up inside quite nicely, so I'll plug it back in again, and hopefully we still have reverse lights, and I haven't messed anything up. All right, and the last, probably most difficult part is actually trying to get the wiring from the engine bay through up to the stereo. So that means going through in behind here in this very tight little space. I'm not a big person and it's still really tight for me, but I need to go in through the back here. Apparently there is I've got to get this panel off. There is a grommet that goes through to the engine bay up in this corner, so that's where I'm going. Well, I knew it couldn't all be easy, and I've been fighting for the last hour or so trying to find access to get through to this grommet into the inside. I've pulled most of the inside panel off. I've sort of unclipped most of it. I haven't pulled it off completely. And inside there's a lot of this soft foam sort of insulation that's packed in all down the side of the car. I have to pull a bunch of that out to get down the back to actually reach the grommet, and with a bit of effort and forcing blindly and reaching down, I can manage to feel the back of the grommet. I have managed to get a wire through, but obviously these RCA cables, that's what I've got to put through the hole, and it's quite sort of, you know, the point comes through nicely, and then you've got this hard edge. It's quite hard to force it through the grommet. And then I came up with what I think is quite an ingenious plan. Is I actually went and got some of my like silicon tubes, and I cut the end off of one of the silicon tube sort of nozzles that fits, you know, I cut it down so it fits quite tightly over this. I'm going to tape it onto the end of the RCA, and hopefully that should make it a lot easier to force it through the hole. That's the plan anyway, so let's see how it works. All right, well, it was getting later yesterday afternoon, and I was getting frustrated because my initial little plan didn't work with my little nozzle thing. So I thought best thing to do is to have a break and leave it for a little while and come back to it later, and that's what I've done. So it's the next morning, and I've had a bit of time to think. One of the issues is that I can't get any purchase, can't get any leverage in there. It's really tight, so I'm just sort of at the extension of my fingertips trying to push this through the hole in the tight grommet. The hole is big enough, but it's so tight, the rubber is so tight to try and fit the head of this RCA plug through that it's just quite difficult. So what I've come up with is a new twist on my previous plan. So I've actually still got the cut-off bit of the silicon nozzle, but I've actually put a piece of wire through it with a knot on it, and that's going to be able to, I'm going to be able to poke that through and then be able to pull it from the other side as well. So I've just got to tape this really well onto this, and hopefully I can pull it through nicely, and we'll get it there. Let's see how we go. Yay! Hey! Why didn't I just try that from the start? So much easier. That worked really well. I just managed to poke the end of the wire through. I could feel the wire on the other side of the grommet, and just yanking it through. So having that pointy end and having the wire, I think that method works quite well. I'm going to remember that and use that in the future. We have that wire through, which is a big win. All right, so I'll just show you what I had to do in the back here. So this panel came off with undoing this screw. This pops off. There's a couple of screws to hold in a speaker here. I had issues trying to get this clip off. I got the front edge off. I couldn't get the back edge off, and apparently there's a screw in here that holds this panel in, so I couldn't get this panel all the way off. But I managed to get it out far enough to get my arm in down the back. And down the back in here, it's hard to see, but in behind the foam, in behind the seat belt, right down in the far corner is where the grommet is, so it's quite hard to get into. I had to pull a lot of this foam stuff out, which I'm actually quite impressed with. The entire area in the void in between the panels is filled with this foam stuff, so that's really helps with sound deadening and stuff. And I'm amazed that these cars can be as reasonably light as they are and still have all of this sound deadening and stuff in them. But yeah, I managed to get the wire in, so now I'm going to have to try and find a way to run it down in behind these panels. Should be pretty easy, and through across to the center console and then down all the way to the front. That is all installed quite nicely. It all looks nice and neat and tidy, which is exactly what I wanted. And I just realized and remembered that I didn't install the microphone for the Handsfree kit. So I'll quickly install this now. It means just pulling this back out again. These are usually pretty easy to install, usually sort of just underneath the sun visor, something like that. Run the wires down through the pillar underneath the rubber that's just along the edge of the pillar, under the dash, wire it in. Let's get into that. All right, so we have it installed completely, and I actually connected up a cable. I drilled a hole through the top side of the pocket here, so you can't see it, but that pokes through the USB cable for the Apple CarPlay, and so I can just plug my phone in and store it in this center pocket here, and have my Apple CarPlay working, and it seems to work really well. So this is the first time using Apple CarPlay, but it seems to be a pretty good little system. So there we go. The stereo's installed. It's all working properly, doing what it's supposed to. I'll have a bunch of links in the description to all the products and stuff I used in this video. So if you want to look up any of these bits and pieces, I'll link them in there. If you're searching for Porsche parts, any Porsche parts, PorschePartsByJeff.com. Compare prices there first, and you can watch these videos a day early, as always, on Patreon. All right, guys. See you later.